Scanner til. So, good morning, everybody. Fantastic to see you. Let me start by giving a very warm welcome to Denmark. Also, welcome to this specific place, Helsingør. It is a famous place in Denmark, maybe even outside of our borders, for two reasons. First one is that not very far from here is the castle of Kronborg. The ones of you who know Shakespeare, Hamlet, will know that this is where the story of Hamlet unfolds. The most famous quote, of course, from that play is, "There's something rotten in the state of Denmark." I certainly don't hope that will be the sentiment with which you will leave this conference in a few days. The second reason why this place is well known in Denmark is that this is where our national football team meets before they play the big matches. And actually, they're here today. So if some of you are football fans, you might see some of your idols, some of the stars walking around in their flip-flops and bathrobes. And by the way, that's probably also if you think there's more press than there's usual at these events, they're not here for you. But in a way, maybe it's a good analogy. The reason why the football team meets here is because it's a very nice place in which to reflect, in which to strategize. So just as they are now strategizing on how to win the next match, we will use the next couple of days to strategize and reflect on the decisions made in Dubai last year and the decisions we all need to make in Baku later this year. We know that we are in a hurry. We know that even though historic progress was made in Dubai, especially with regards to the decision to transition away from fossil fuels, tripling renewable energy, doubling energy efficiency measures, more and better NDCs, economy-wide, covering all gases, not only CO2. Decision to put on hold to deforestation, reduce methane emissions, loss and damage fund. All of these very big decisions that were made in Dubai. Even despite of them, we still have a lot of work in front of us. And Cop29 needs to be a COP where we also deliver. I think the world is expecting of us to deliver on many issues, but especially on financing. So now important decisions has been made on the action. How do we pay for it? This is definitely at the core of the discussions that we will have the next couple of days, alongside, of course, other very important topics. Now, I'm extremely happy to say that this is the third year in a row that we've been able to host a meeting like this with the present COP presidency and the incoming COP presidency. We definitely, from the Danish government's perspective, see this as an honor, first of all, but obviously also a chance for us to help facilitate a start to the international climate negotiations calendar, which is a more informal start, meaning that we have opportunities to discuss with each other what the agenda for the next year will look like, which are the most important questions to resolve, which routes to take. Now, I've already said a few words about the result in Cop28, but I want to also use this opportunity to congratulate my my friend, Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber and his team for your excellent work on getting the results that you managed to get in Dubai. I think that had you asked people, definitely had you asked me 1 year ago at Copenhagen Climate Ministerial last year, if we could have gotten such a good result, I would have said, yes, let's work for it, but I would have probably been a little bit skeptical. Because really to evaluate what was decided last year, you also need to look at what was decided in the 28 previous years. And looking at it that way, it really shows you how pivotal, how historic the decisions were. So, Dr. Sultan, thank you again, and thank you also for being here and supporting this idea to kickstart the climate talks of this year in Denmark. I also want to, of course, congratulate our incoming COP presidency, especially because I understand that today is a very special day in Azerbaijan. We really appreciate that even though there's a national holiday and you should really be home celebrating with your family, you choose to be here in Denmark. So thank you so much for that. And with those words, I will pass the floor to Dr. Sultan. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, esteemed colleagues and dear friends, good morning, and it is indeed a great pleasure to be with you all here today in this very beautiful setting for the first climate ministerial since the historic success of COP28. Allow me to begin, though, by thanking our hosts, my very dear friend, Minister Dan Jorgensen, and the Danish government, as well as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for their welcome and the warm hospitality. I'd like to also acknowledge my dear colleague Simon Steele, the Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC, and Selwyn Hart, the Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General, for their friendship, their support, and their continued guidance and engagement. It is also great to see the President-designate of COP29, my brother and dear friend, His Excellency Mukhtar Babayev, and I'm also happy to see His Excellency André Correa do Lago, the Climate Secretary of Brazil, the hosts of COP30. Together, we represent the troika of COP presidencies that was launched in February in Dubai. The troika, or this new initiative of establishing this troika, aims to enhance continuity. It is centered around ensuring that we continue to build momentum and to drive the implementation, the successful implementation of the historic UAE consensus. This troika can and should help ensure that the next crucial round of nationally determined contributions are in line with keeping our collective North Star of 1.5 within reach. And during this session, I would like to explore how the troika can make a real difference in raising ambition and in accelerating our collective climate progress. But before I continue, I must acknowledge and fully recognize Professor Jamskia, the chair of the IPCC, for his continued engagement, guidance, and unwavering support. The IPCC has played a vital role in ensuring that the global stocktake and the UAE consensus were rooted in the science, and under his guidance, I am sure that science will continue to guide the way ahead. Colleagues and friends, the UAE consensus was a victory for multilateralism and a true demonstration of what can unfold when we unite and when we adopt a solidarity approach in helping address global challenges. And it is also another proof of the power of inclusivity. And I'm sure everyone would agree that inclusivity was truly practiced throughout the engagements of COP28 in Dubai. The UAE consensus also showed that positivity, unity, and solidarity can overcome negativity and polarization. That is a culture that was nurtured at COP28, and it is my view that this culture must be maintained and enhanced throughout the future COPs. We did witness and experience that countries set self-interest aside for the common good and for the common interest, and united around the common goal of keeping 1.5 within reach. We set our sights on high ambition, and we made history collectively together. COP28 was the first COP to agree on a just, orderly, responsible, and equitable energy transition. It was the first to lock in a renewable energy target, tripling its capacity by 2030. The first to set a date to end deforestation this decade, and the first to launch and begin to capitalize the fund for loss and damage. COP28 broke the mold in many other ways, and it did that by proactively engaging all key stakeholders, those who are relevant, were not only invited, but encouraged, welcomed, and motivated to engage and to contribute. And that, of course, included business, the private sector, industry. And this happened, and I say this with full confidence, like never before. Industries joined forces on practical pathways to decarbonize at scale. We had a record number of energy producers committed to zero methane emissions by 2030. And we also experienced that under-recognized climate topics, including health and food, were integrated into the COP agenda. And more than $85 billion were delivered in new commitments and actual investments. In short, we changed the mindset that views climate action as a burden to one that sees it as a true, unique opportunity to stimulate new industries, new jobs, leverage new technologies, of course, including the transformative power of artificial intelligence. It also helps ensure sustainable socio-economic growth. Colleagues, excellencies, my friends, while the UAE consensus made history, an agreement is only as good as its implementation. We must now take urgent action across the climate agenda, from mitigation to adaptation to finance. And on mitigation, a critical tool for correcting course is the next round of nationally determined contributions. Parties must do the work now to ensure that their NDCs meet the urgency of the moment and should be submitted at least 9 months before COP30. These NDCs should be economy-wide, cover all greenhouse gases, including methane, and accelerate action to 2030. They must align with 1.5. Follow the science. Follow the science and follow through on the UAE consensus. That includes putting policies in place to deliver 60% emission reductions by 2035 compared to 2019 levels. And they must ensure that energy transition pathways are just, orderly, and meaningful and responsible. Governments and all relevant parties must be transparent and must be more honest about what this will take. And they should be very clear about the costs and the trade-offs involved. We can't misguide or mislead anyone anymore. We must confront the facts very early on. And it is our responsibility, those who are in this room, it is our job, it is our duty to do that. Excellencies, our efforts to reduce emissions must be matched by equally strong action on adaptation. All parties should design a comprehensive national adaptation plan that cover food systems, water security, nature, and health. These plans should be focused on protecting and improving the lives of people everywhere, and critically, they must be well-funded. Policies with no means of implementation, equipped and fully enabled by finance, are meaningless. The UAE consensus recognized that doubling adaptation finance alone will not fill the gap. All sources, from Adaptation Fund to the Green Climate Fund, must be maintained and replenished. On top of that, governments must embed adaptation funding in national and municipal budgets. If we do this, we will strengthen our collective resilience. Failure to do so will leave us all increasingly vulnerable to climate impacts. My colleagues, finance is the key enabler to all climate progress, and in fact is very essential to rebuilding trust, and especially with emerging markets, with emerging economies, and in particular with the Global South. COP28 delivered a trust-building breakthrough on loss and damage by creating the fund and mobilizing the initial contributions. I am encouraged that the first board meeting will take place in April. And let me take this opportunity to call on all who can to make a substantial contribution to the Loss and Damage Fund. Finance will be the priority of COP29 as parties consider the scale and scope of the new collective quantified goal. Everything we do in the lead up to COP29 must be centered around finance and making finance available, accessible, and affordable. COP28 advanced the conversation around a comprehensive redesign of the international financial system to align finance flows with climate goals. We now need to move from conversation, from dialogue, to real and true implementation. Climate finance must be made more available, more accessible, and for sure, more affordable at every level. The IFIs and MDBs must be capitalized to meet the size of the challenge and ensure this is turned into an opportunity. Private finance must work alongside development funding to transform the climate finance landscape. That is the thinking behind the Altera that was launched by the UAE at COP28. Altera is the largest private investment vehicle in the world, focused 100% on climate solutions. Altera's $30 billion fund aims to mobilize $250 billion in additional investments by 2030, targeted toward a pipeline of projects within an emphasis on emerging markets and the Global South. Altera provides an effective catalytic model that I hope is replicated and matched by other innovations in climate finance. And with this in mind, I want to take this opportunity to invite all parties, all relevant stakeholders, and all interested individuals to come and participate at the UAE Climate Finance Forum that we will host in Abu Dhabi in June this year. We will bring together all relevant stakeholders from public, multilateral, development, and private finance, and we will provide an inclusive platform to help realize a climate finance architecture that unlocks the trillions needed for transformational, green, and sustainable growth. Excellencies, to turn talk into action, we must adopt a new spirit of accountability at every level across public and private sectors. Industries must develop transparent and reliable reporting tools, and we must use every mechanism available to keep all stakeholders moving in the right direction. In this spirit, working with the incoming presidency of Azerbaijan and the upcoming presidency of Brazil, the Troika will play a strategic role in catalyzing collective climate action in support of Mission 1.5. The success of COP28 showed that breakthroughs are possible when parties unite in solidarity. The Troika will build on this solidarity, generate political support for 1.5 aligned NDCs, and keep the UAE consensus at the core of the climate agenda. At a time when we must move quickly from negotiated text to tangible outcomes, the Troika will act as a vital bridge between presidencies and work closely with all relevant institutions and stakeholders to ensure that we maintain momentum. As such, we are calling on the UN Secretary General to leverage the power of the UN system by creating a unified interagency platform to effectively support parties as they prepare their upcoming NDCs. In addition, the Troika will lead a series of high-level political convenings at major international gatherings, including climate ministerials, the G20, and UNGA, all aimed at moving everyone forward together. Colleagues and friends, this time last year, none of us, like my dear friend just said, knew precisely what would emerge from COP28. And that was fair. But together, we defied the doubters and inspired the optimists. I know we can do it again. In fact, we must do it again. Let's follow an unprecedented agreement with an unprecedented action. The UAE consensus set the defining roadmap for keeping 1.5 within reach, in line with the science and with equity for all. In these crucial remaining years before 2030, we must act with urgency, implement with determination, collaborate with full inclusivity, and leave no stone unturned in meeting our climate goals. I thank you all. I very much appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to our constructive discussions ahead. If you don't mind, allow me now to call on His Excellency Mukhtar Babayev, the President-designate of Cop29, and my Troika partner, to give his remarks. Please, sir.
Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to address you all today at this important annual meeting here in Copenhagen. And I would like to convey my deep appreciation to the government of Denmark for organizing such an important forum. As a COP29 President-designate, I look forward to collaborating and welcoming you to Baku this November. Colleagues, we are making progress, and I must express my deep appreciation to COP28 President, Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, for his excellent leadership of last year's talks. And it is an honor to launch the COP presidency's Troika with our esteemed partners from the United Arab Emirates and Brazil. By working together, I am confident that we can maintain the momentum, ensure a seamless transition without losing focus, and realize our climate goals. Ladies and gentlemen, despite all the progress at COP28, we are still not on a pathway to 1.5. And COP29 comes at a deeply complex moment, because we have now seen the first one-year period of temperatures 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And we are seeing the direct impact of rising temperatures on lives and livelihoods, as vulnerable communities face one crisis after another. When we meet in Baku, these communities must be front and center in our minds. And with this sense of urgency and determination, we must address the critical challenges facing our planet. So, having found consensus on the roadmap, how do we enable action? Ladies and gentlemen, finance underpins everything. As we said in the global stocktake, finance is a critical enabler of climate action. But it's the growing gap between the needs of developing countries and what is available. And many are losing trust in the process, and that it can deliver for them. So we must all work tirelessly to mobilize the resources we need. And this year, finance will lie at the heart of climate diplomacy. The negotiations of the new collective quantified goal on climate finance are an opportunity to set a new path, unlock funds, and rebuild trust between the parties. If we get this right, and we send a clear and strong signal that more public and private finance will be allocated to climate targets, then we will empower all parties to raise the ambitions of their upcoming NDCs. And parties will be able to contribute their fair share towards delivering deep, rapid, and sustained emission reductions. We will make a reality of our goal to triple renewable energy capacity, double energy efficiency improvements, and transition away from fossil fuel in a just, orderly, and equitable manner. As a part of the global stocktakes, call the parties to come forward with ambitious, economy-wide emission reduction targets aligned with the limiting global warming to 1.5. And in parallel with mitigation, we need urgent progress to adapt to the escalating impacts of climate change. But again, implementation is fully dependent on finance. This adoption of the United Arab Emirates framework for global climate resilience at COP28 was a significant milestone. And we have to make sure that all countries have national adaptation plans and policies by 2025. So, colleagues, we need to work together to find ambitious, achievable, and fair solutions that scale up accessible finance, lower the cost of capital, develop new green financial instruments, deepen green capital markets, and simplify access to climate funds. All to ensure that the developing world is not forced to choose the carbon-intensive development pathways that the developed world took. To conclude, let's use the moment to turn ambition into action. Let's put in place a finance to enable a just and orderly transition, to enable us to build a sustainable and climate-resilient world for all. And I am looking forward to working with you all on this challenge over the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mukhtar, for your remarks. Allow me now to invite Vice Minister Dolago on behalf of the COP30 presidency. Andrei, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber. It's a pleasure to see you again. And I want to thank our hosts. Denmark has been hosting these meetings that have been very important to show the way to what we can do this year. Minister Babayev, we are in your hands, but we are most of all, we want to contribute as much as possible, and the idea of the Troika, I believe, is that we want to do more. I think that's the mandate we have received, and you can count on Brazil, and we know that the continuity of the success of Dubai is what the world is expecting from us. So I'm not going to repeat. I think that both statements were very clear and very much centered on what we need to do. I would just like to mention that naturally Brazil this year, with the presidency of the G20, is also trying to contribute in putting climate at the center, in putting Mission 1.5 at the center, without obviously touching any of the mandates that we have under the Paris Agreement, and the mandates that were very clear that all the members of the Convention and the Paris Agreement want to discuss in the appropriate setting. But the truth is that we have clearly identified that the means of implementation are the bottleneck of our efforts, and so we are trying to think a little out of the box. If we think that the box is Paris and the UNFCCC, we're thinking a little out of the box under the G20 to try to contribute even more for the debates and the discussions and the success that I'm sure we're going to have in Baku. So I think this new element that has been introduced with the Troika has to be interpreted in its very clear mission and mandate. We are here to help to make sure that 1.5 continues to be possible and objectively finding the finance that we really need for our NDCs. We believe in Brazil very much in the order finance, then ambition, because ambition in finance is what will stimulate many countries that have very strong challenges in facing climate change to be able to act. But we will only be able to do that all together. So we are very conscious that we have to do what is expected from the Troika by the clear mandate that we received in Dubai. So thank you very much. I believe that I would like to mention, like President Lula has been mentioning a lot, how recent extreme events in Brazil had terrible consequences, but I think that Jim will present us in a much more scientific and serious way. But the truth is that people are feeling climate change closer than ever, and this increases our responsibility and the expectation that people have of what we can do and we must do. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andre. And as I said in my earlier remarks, we called on the UN Secretary General to help mobilize support for the Troika and to ensure that the UN system steps up to engage and to support the design and the implementation of the critical next round of NDCs. On that, allow me to invite my dear colleague, the UNFCCC Executive Secretary Simon Steele, for his remarks. Please.
Thank you. Excellencies, friends, the Copenhagen Ministerials have become a crucial touch point each year. This year, we meet under the shadow of the WMO's report showing the latest temperature increases that have been off the charts. Today, I'd like to focus on the solutions. In Baku, in January, I spoke about what it will take to achieve a net zero emissions world by mid-century. A world where every nation is safe, opportunities are shared, and 10 billion people are protected from climate impacts, where clean energy is abundant and affordable. The decisions that will get us there will largely be taken over the coming 20 months, building on the successes of Dubai and the UAE consensus. And I want to take this opportunity to commend once again Dr. Sultan and your team for your incredible leadership in getting us to that point. You made a real difference. At the end of this year, we need to agree on a new collective, quantified goal for climate finance. To undo the deadlock between developed and developing countries, we need to make climate finance bigger and better. Bigger to meet developing countries' growing needs. Better by finding new sources of finance for global climate action. Bigger to ensure investment in resilience, maximizing the ability of national adaptation plans to attract financial support. Better by reforming development banks, recapitalizing them for climate, and making the most of their resources. This will come out of a working level process, but ultimately, it is those around the table here at the political level who have the responsibility of getting the agreement over the line. We're talking trillions, not billions. That is going to require more from all sources and serious conversations about making new, innovative sources real rather than just words on a page. Let's cast our minds forward to December 2025. By this time, we must have welcomed a new generation of national climate plans. These NDCs 3.0 are the investment plans for the future. As I wrote to you all last week, these new NDCs for 2035 are due less than a year from now. It's equally vital that your 2030 targets are boosted in parallel wherever possible. Both will be decisive in limiting global heating to 1.5 degrees this century and avert the worst impacts of the climate crisis. The more each nation treats its new national climate plans as an economy-wide blueprint for growth and jobs, the more opportunity and security it will provide its people. Setting a bold climate course will enable countries to drive business investment, productivity, and rising living standards. NDCs 3.0, which double as national investment plans, can steer economies towards growth-driving industries and services fueled by renewable energy. The benefits will be even greater when these plans also boost skills and workforce participation, particularly for women. If we halve greenhouse gas pollution by 2030, while tripling renewable energy and doubling energy efficiency, we'll also help free countries from the vagaries and volatile fossil fuel prices. Pollution will drop sharply, saving millions of lives, and delivering major budget savings for governments and taxpayers. To take these plans from economic blueprints to shovel-ready projects to real economy outcomes will require a sea change in climate finance, especially for vulnerable developing economies facing gale force financial headwinds and high borrowing costs. By drawing up ambitious climate investment plans, countries help create the demand that is needed. It's also crucial that current climate commitments are fully and promptly implemented with transparency and accountability. Your biennial transparency reports can show how the world progress is being made, and I urge you to submit them as soon as possible and by year's end at the latest. In this talk of climate finance and transparency, I do need to mention that our organization, the UNFCCC, now faces severe financial challenges. And these challenges were highlighted throughout the course of last year, throughout the budget negotiations with parties for the new biennium 2024-2025. Our budget is currently less than half funded. We're attempting to meet an ever-growing mandate while also meeting the many challenges outlined here today. Our job is to make your job easier, to carry out the tasks you've all agreed we should do, but we can only do this if we have the funding support. I wrote to you all last week. This is me once again ringing that alarm bell. I urge you to respond as soon as possible to ensure you get the support you need and have requested from us. So on climate action, we're now in the race to the top. Every country has a choice: plan for a better economy and fix finance for a better world, or miss out on the opportunities others are reaping. So I thank you, and I look forward to the discussions over the next couple of days. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. And now I'd like to invite our friend Selwyn Hart on behalf of the Secretary General. Selwyn, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber. And like others, I want to congratulate you and your fantastic team for delivering a historic outcome at COP28. And I also wish to thank our host, Minister Jurgensen, and his team as well, his fantastic team, for hosting this ministerial meeting, as well as the incoming COP29 president, the COP 30 presidency, our colleagues from Brazil and my colleague and friend Simon, and waiting patiently to hear from Jim as well, and all of you. The reality is that we made significant progress at COP28, and it has provided us with a very clear roadmap on what needs to be done in Baku, as well as what needs to be delivered at COP30 in Brazil, with a set of very clear actions that we must all individually and collectively take to place the world on track to keep 1.5 alive, and also equally importantly, to deliver climate justice to those on the front lines of the climate crisis. And we all know the gaps. The gaps are enormous. We all know the challenges and the obstacles. And I wish to propose, and as I said, this roadmap is very clear, and I wish to identify the three really important tasks and objectives that we have ahead of us. First is on the preparation of the next round of nationally determined contributions. The outcome at COP28 was crystal clear on the expectations related to the ambition level and the quality of NDCs. These NDCs must be aligned with the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement. They must be economy-wide and cover all greenhouse gases and sectors. It's absolutely clear that if these NDCs are to be effective in combating the climate crisis, they must be fully in sync with the development plans and priorities of countries. They must also double, as the Secretary General has said, as investment plans and transition plans for countries, clearly defining national transition pathways, including how countries intend to transition away from fossil fuel, both production and use, and how they intend to contribute to the global goals of tripling renewable energy and doubling energy efficiency. And they must also clearly identify the investment needs of countries, particularly developing countries. These investments will need to be sourced from both domestic and international sources. And we know that timelines, pathways, and targets will differ for countries at different levels of development. But all efforts must be consistent with achieving global net zero by 2050 and securing the 1.5 degree goal. And I wish to reiterate the commitment made by the Secretary General in his closing comments to COP28 to mobilize the UN system in support of developing countries. So we definitely welcome the prompt from the Troika to the Secretary General. And we are working within the system. We're working with our colleagues in UNDP through the Climate Promise to build on what already exists, working with our colleagues in the NDC partnership as well as the broader international system to ensure that developing countries are provided with the support to design and prepare ambitious and investable 1.5 aligned nationally determined contributions. But we will require the support of donors to make this a reality. So I urge all of you, as you encourage countries to prepare 1.5 aligned NDCs, as you encourage the UN system to support developing countries, that you also contribute to this collective effort and to this collective endeavor. Second is on finance, and it's absolutely clear what needs to be delivered at Baku. But in addition to this new collective quantified goal, as Dr. Sultan and my other colleagues have indicated, we also need to fix the financial architecture to ensure that the financial architecture supports developing countries to access affordable finance at the scale that they need, both for their mitigation, but also their adaptation efforts. And the challenges faced by developing countries are well known and can no longer be ignored. The high cost of capital, little or no fiscal space, severe debt distress, prohibitive access to markets, technology, and innovation. These challenges and obstacles are well known, and we need to collectively work to fix them. And it's great that at this ministerial you have representatives from the climate funds, from the MDB system, because all parts of the financial architecture need to be working together and in a coordinated manner if we are to deliver the finance at the scale and at the pace that this crisis demands. And my final point is on international cooperation. Countries cannot, no one country can solve this crisis alone. From critical energy transition minerals, the early retirement of fossil fuel infrastructure, and unlocking the trillions that's needed to finance the transition, all will require unprecedented levels of collaboration and cooperation between nations, the private sector, and civil society. It is absolutely essential that as we work on fixing finance, preparing the next round of indices, that this is done in a spirit of collaboration and cooperation across and within national borders. You can be assured that the United Nations system will be supportive of this effort. The Troika, we are with you, beside you, behind you, in front of you, wherever you need us to be at any time. So I hope I was not too long. My favorite Hamlet quote is, "Brevity is the soul of wit," and I hope that I adhered to that quote from Hamlet. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Selwyn, and like you said, we're very much counting on your engagement and the engagement of the Secretary General, and we will be waiting for your response on how to activate effectively the UN system in support of the Troika's effort. Before I go back to our host, Danny Gerson, who will moderate the rest of today's discussion, allow me to invite Professor Jamskia to give us his views and his scientific guide. Please, sir.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sultan. Excellencies, distinguished delegates. First, a big thank you to our Danish hosts for their welcome and also for inviting a scientific contribution to the Copenhagen Climate Ministerial. Now, the IPCC approved the final report of its 6th cycle, the synthesis report, almost exactly a year ago in Interlaken in Switzerland. And as IPCC chair for the 7th assessment cycle, I have to stress that while the findings of that report stand the test of time, our climate has moved on, as Minister Babayev has pointed out. And as confirmed by the World Meteorological Organization, 2023 was the hottest year on record, with particularly startling extremes in ocean temperatures. Extreme weather events and wildfires ceased to be part of future projections. They were evident on our television screens, and for far too many of us were a present reality. And sea levels continue to rise relentlessly, with consequences for small island states and low-lying coastal communities. And all of this, as we have demonstrated, is down to more than a century of human activities, including burning fossil fuels and unequal and unsustainable patterns of energy and land use. Now, our latest report showed that with every increment of warming, the world will become more and more dangerous. Beyond 1.5 degrees warming, we will see new risks emerging associated with sea level rise, permafrost degradation, biodiversity loss, water scarcity, more extreme weather, and food insecurity. But on the policy front, obviously, we have encouraging signs of progress, and I would like to congratulate Dr. Sultan and the Cop29 presidency for the progress that was made. The UAE consensus has made a start on the challenge of transitioning away from fossil fuels. It established a new framework for the global goal on adaptation and operationalised the Loss and Damage Fund. But IPCC findings need to be interpreted in the light of all that's happened in the last 12 months. And that's what I'd like to do in just the next few minutes. And I will do it with reference to the 3 goals of the Paris Agreement and indeed the sessions at this climate ministerial. First, on mitigation ambition and warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. In IPCC, we've been saying for more than 5 years now that only immediate and deep emission reductions will allow global warming to be limited to 1.5 degrees. And we can't go on saying that forever. Indeed, the last UNEP GAP report was entitled Broken Record. I looked back at the media release from the Special Report on Global Warming of 1.5 degrees, and I was quoted as saying that limiting warming to 1.5 degrees is possible within the laws of chemistry and physics. And I can still stand by that statement, noting that this refers to the long-run average level of warming, not to the single year like the one we've just seen. But it's also clear what would need to happen. Once emitted, carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for centuries. It's the accumulation of emissions that matters. And in the middle range of the scenarios we have assessed, greenhouse gas emissions peak before 2025, they fall by 43% by 2030, 60% by 2035, 69% by 2040, and reach net zero roughly around the middle of the century. We can't just pick a single year. We have to follow the pathway. If we don't act now, we close the option of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, as we will have used up the available carbon budget around the end of this decade, even with the current set of nationally determined contributions. But we've also shown that this is possible. In literally hundreds of pages, we've set out specifically what can be done in terms of energy supply, energy demand, transportation, agriculture, forestry, and other land use, both through technology and patterns of human behaviour. And most of these actions also yield wider co-benefits. They can make contributions, positive contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals and contribute to a just transition. And we do have the tools. We have shown that carbon pricing, regulations, and other interventions have already resulted in gigatons of avoided emissions, and much more can be achieved if policies and measures are scaled up and deployed more widely. Second, let me turn to adaptation and resilience. And adaptation action has increased, but the progress is uneven. We are not adapting fast enough. Most observed adaptation is fragmented, small in scale, incremental, sector-specific, and focused more on planning than implementation. Hard limits to adaptation, as well as soft limits caused by lack of resources and institutional capacity, are being reached in some sectors and regions. Maladaptation actions, which bring short-term gains but are detrimental in the long run, are also increasing and are disproportionately affecting vulnerable groups. The increasing gaps between adaptation action taken and what's needed are largest among lower-income populations, and at the current rate of planning and implementation, adaptation gaps can only continue to grow. And third, on finance and means of implementation, there are manifest gaps between tracked climate finance and what is needed to put us on a low emissions and climate resilient development pathway. Only between 4 and 8% of tracked climate finance is allocated to adaptation, and more than 90% of adaptation finance comes from public sources. Adaptation finance gaps are constraining implementation of adaptation options, especially in developing countries. Increasing public and private finance flows by billions of dollars per year, increasing direct access to multilateral funds, strengthening project pipeline development, and shifting finance from readiness activities to project implementation can enhance adaptation. and projects that yield joint mitigation and adaptation benefits are a potential source of private finance. And meanwhile, though the gaps are narrower, tracked climate finance for mitigation is still a factor of 3 to 6 below what would be required to put us on a 1.5 or 2 degrees pathway. The gaps are actually least for energy supply, notably electricity generation, but greater for energy efficiency, transport, and land use measures. And for mitigation, reducing risks and leveraging private flows through public guarantees, local capital market development, and building greater trust in international cooperation have a role to play. Now, finally, what can be expected of IPCC during the coming 7th assessment cycle, which began just 8 months ago? Now, due to our rigorous science-based processes, it's going to be some time before new reports are available. The panel met in Istanbul in January, and thanks to our Turkish hosts, and agreed on the content of our programme of work, though the detailed timeline needs further discussion. By early 2027, we should release a special report on cities and climate change, and the work on that is already underway. By the end of 2027, we should have a methodology report on carbon dioxide removal technologies and carbon capture, utilisation and storage, which will inform the submission of national inventories. And during 2028, the working group co-chairs hope to have finalised 3 working group reports, followed by a synthesis report in 2029. There's also going to be an update and revision of technical guidelines on impacts and adaptation, which were last produced in 1994, a very long time ago. This will be published alongside the Working Group 2 reports on impacts, adaptation and vulnerability, and the updated guidelines will cover adaptation indicators, metrics and methodologies. And our sincere hope is that this supports the global goal on adaptation and may be indeed help to underpin greater financial flows for adaptation. So to sum it all up, the scale and pace of climate change poses unprecedented challenges for humanity. But IPCC's recent work has shown that we have the means and the tools to address these challenges if we choose to use them. And just to say, the newly elected scientific leadership of IPCC stands ready to play its part in supporting a move from problems to solutions and from analysis to action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. No doubt that your insights underscores the necessity for urgent global action. And now we move on for a few reactions from different groups. And I want to start by giving the floor to Uganda on behalf of the G77 and China.
Thank you, Minister for Development Cooperation and Global Climate Diplomacy of Denmark and the Government of Denmark and the Cop28 and Cop29 presidency for the hosting of this ministerial meeting. G77 and China finds this a very helpful opportunity for better engagement and setting the scene for the work ahead. We look forward working closely with you. Distinguished delegates and guests, it is with great honor that I make this opening remark on behalf of G77 and China, representing the largest group of countries within the UNFCCC process. Climate change and its impacts are not a new reality to the countries I represent. They are a daily reality, a crisis that adversely affects our economies and presents a compounding risk to achieving a sustainable development. From loss and damage first, which our economies are burdened to bear, to climate change impacts that threaten our economic and social resilience. Developing countries are highly vulnerable to climate impacts. Ambitious and scaled-up climate action is an urgent need. If I may begin with a reflection from COP28, I will proceed to first elaborate a few important outcomes of COP28. I want to also take this opportunity to thank our host for COP28 for the job well done. You made us feel at home. G77 and China highlights as key outcome of COP28 the following decision on operationalizing the Loss and Damage Fund, San Diego Network, the decision on global goal on adaptation and the establishment of the UAE framework for global climate resilience, the outcome of the first global stocktake, and the decision on the Just Transition Work Program. These outcomes are significant for advancing global climate action and provide frameworks and mechanisms for addressing key challenges such as loss and damage, adaptation, and monitoring progress towards the climate goals, which are the key priorities for developing countries for building our long-term resilience to risk, vulnerability, and climate-related threats. Let us look ahead then. It is now that time to build on these outcomes and ensure that the progress is made at key moments in the climate negotiations towards scaling up climate action with a strong emphasis on scaling up means of implementation. At COP29, it is pivotal that parties come together to achieve these goals. Among the key priorities for G77 and China for COP29 are: 1, finance, technology transfer and development, and other means of implementation are vital priorities for G77 and China. It is crucial that support is provided for developing countries in terms of finance, technology, and the means of implementation consistent with the UNFCCC and its Paris agreements. COP29 cannot ignore the need for ensuring that sufficient and adequate means of implementation reach developing countries, and that the existing gaps and needs to address climate impacts are addressed. Closely, the gap in the provision of the means of implementation needs to be among the priorities for COP29 in Baku. It is equally important that COP29 results in meaningful outcomes on finance support, including the establishment of the new collective quantified goal on climate finance that is commensurate to the needs of developing countries. Additionally, for scaling up climate action, technology plays a vital role. G77 and China recognize the need for strengthening the implementation of technology development and transfer commitments under UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement through the the technology implementation programs. 2, urgent, rapid, and ambitious mitigation action by developed countries is another priority for COP29. G77 and China highlights the urgency for developed countries to undertake rapid and ambitious mitigation action, which will contribute to the achieving the net zero emission as early as possible. This is a long-standing priority for developing countries, and the group further stresses the importance of urgency of focusing on this. 3, operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund and the strengthening the loss and damage architecture of the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement, including the San Diego Network and also additional international mechanism, is pivotal for COP29 as well. While we appreciate the outcome of COP28, it is extremely important to mark the importance of operationalization and capitalization of the Loss and Damage Fund, which needs to ensure simplified and fast access to adequate funds for those who are affected by the adverse impact of climate change. G77 and China are among those most affected, which results in high burdens on their national budgets. It is important that the progress made at COP28 towards addressing the loss and damage is not forgotten, but instead paves the way for further access at COP29. Additionally, the full operationalization of San Diego network to catalyze access to technical assistance related to loss and damage need to be ensured as well. 4, the next cycle of national determined contributions, the NDCs, and the rising ambition are also among the key priorities of G77 and China for 2024 and the COP29. It is of utmost importance that there are clear assurances that developing countries will receive support of preparing and implementing their NDCs and national adaptation plans, including through the outcoming cycle of revised NDCs. It is essential to mark the significance of the need for enhanced provision of support for the implementation of NDCs, which in turn will determine the level of ambition that the developing countries can include in their national determined contributions. While there are several other priorities which I would like to highlight, due to time factor, I will conclude marking 2 key aspects which are essential for G77 and China. First, the importance of inclusive, transparent, and party-driven processes in climate negotiations and discussions, which are essential for successful outcome of COP29. Second, the importance of complying with the principles and provisions of the UNFCCC and its Paris agreements also needs to be highlighted. This refers particularly to common but differentiated responsibilities in light of different national circumstances to ensure equity and fairness in climate negotiations. This is a key component that remains the foundational for the multilateral climate change policy regimes. I would like to thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Minister. And now, on behalf of the EU, I pass the floor to Belgium.
Thank you very much. Let me start by congratulating you, Dan, and your government for organizing this third Copenhagen Climate Ministerial. These Copenhagen meetings quickly turned from new kid on the block into a key political event early in the year. And then a few words on organization of the UNFCCC process. Sometimes we tend to overlook how important good process management is for the outcome. And in this sense, the EU really appreciated the way His Excellency Al Jaber and your team organized the Dubai COP. It was excellent and set an example. The UAE consensus took a crucial step in the 5-year ambition cycle of the Paris Agreement. It provides a strong sense of direction at a critical stage where we have to change course to keep the 1.5 within reach. Dubai places energy systems, renewables, energy efficiency, and transitioning away from fossil fuels at the center of the climate crisis solution. It calls on all parties to contribute to these goal efforts while ensuring a just transition that leaves no one behind. The next step is to translate these global commitments into actions. This requires strengthening international cooperation, and the EU is therefore pleased with the label for COP29 as an enabling COP. The EU has initiated work on its NDC in what we internally call the 2040 target, with the proposal, with the European Commission having executed extensive impact assessments and presenting a proposal. 2024 is the year to prepare for NDC, and this also means stepping up efforts in building partnership around the globe. It is critical that we catalyze and gather the wider international community in a broad cooperation for NDCs that are ambitious, economy-wide, cover all greenhouse gases, and are fully aligned with the 1.5 degrees. In this respect, Mission 1.5 degree will be crucial. Allow me to quickly comment on yesterday's letter from the Troika presidencies. While we really appreciate such a broad undertaking involving all relevant existing mechanisms within and without the UNFCCC and building continuity in the run-up to Belém, we have also some concern on the features of NDCs. These have been clearly spelled out in Paris, Katowice, and of course in Dubai, where parties agreed additional guidance. We do not support redefining NDCs as vehicles for the provision of means of implementation. For that, we have many other tools. The roadmap should assist parties to implement the efforts they agreed. The big deliverable we all expect from COP29 will be on the new collective quantified goal and finance. The discussions on finance increasingly acknowledge that the new finance goal will mean that all hands need to be on deck, as it needs to respond to the scope of the challenge. We see the goal also as a multi-layered goal, expressing our continued strong commitment on public finance, but also go beyond this by mobilizing from all sources, including domestic sources and innovative ones, deploying a broad range of instruments and redirecting private flows to support the Paris goal. The provision and mobilization of climate finance should be a global effort reflecting solidarity, shared responsibility, and the dynamic and evolving respective capabilities of parties, and it should take into account the connection between having sufficient fiscal space and climate action. We need COP29 to send a strong signal for a major shift of the global economy. The other priorities the EU sees for COP29 are the following ones. We need to work towards the successful implementation of the 2-year UAE Belém work program on indicators for measuring global adaptation progress. We should aim for a timely submission of the first biennial transparency report from all countries in 2024. We need to follow up on the GST in a manner that maximizes synergies. This means making use of the mitigation and the just transition work programs to follow up on the global goals agreed in Dubai. We think the successful early agreement on loss and damage was a key element in the success in Dubai, and the EU contributed very substantially to the initial capitalization. It is crucial that we engage constructively in the work of the fund as well as on the broader funding arrangements. On Article 6, we need to bridge gap in expectations and address the remaining issues while respecting the need for environmental integrity. 2024 presents us with mountains to climb, but with mutual trust and cooperation, we can turn this year into a success, and we look forward to work with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Belgium on behalf of the EU. Now I give the floor to the AOSIS group, represented by Samoa.
Thank you, moderator. Excellencies, friends, colleagues, I'm pleased to make this statement on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island Developing States. At the outset, let me thank our host, Denmark, for facilitating such a useful sitting for climate ministers to build our collective understanding on the outcomes from last year and set the foundation to take us through this year of negotiations. I wish to express our sincere gratitude for the hospitality shown to me and my delegation. Allow me to also acknowledge the COP28 presidency and your team for the successful completion of COP28 in Dubai and the endorsement of the UAE consensus. I also recognize the presence of our incoming presidency from Azerbaijan. AOSIS looks forward to working with you through this year and at Cop29 in Baku for strong and bold outcomes. AOSIS acknowledges the work of Troika to implement Mission 1.5, which we trust will contribute in helping us make progress this year to raise ambition on all fronts while enabling implementation. The issues that will be covered at this meeting are keys to driving success in keeping global temperatures below 1.5 in this decade. As I'm sure you all know by now, meeting the 1.5 Celsius is a matter of survival for small island developing states. But we can't get there on our own. We will only succeed if we make progress on each of these issues through a global effort, with each one of us committed to ambitious action. While we will go into more detail during our discussions of each of these issues on our agenda, I would like to highlight the priorities for AOSIS resulting from COP28 outcomes, as well as provide you with our understanding of where we need to focus our action collectively going forward. On mitigation ambitions, we must focus on the outcomes of the first GST at COP28. The GST acknowledged that although some progress has been made, the implementation of the current NDCs will not put us on a pathway to limit emissions to a 1.5 degree temperature rise. Primarily, this will require all countries to remain faithful to their commitments to submit updates to their 2030 targets, as well as NDCs with 2035 targets that are economy-wide, covering all greenhouse gases, sectors, and categories aligned with 1.5 degree target, and their net zero targets by agreed deadlines. In other words, by early 2025, 9 to 12 months before COP30 at least. Regardless of our ambition to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, there are enough greenhouse gases baked into the system for the impacts of human-induced climate change to continue causing severe impacts in vulnerable countries like mine. In this vein, we applaud the agreement in Dubai to operationalize the new dedicated fund for responding to loss and damage, thanks in large part to the dedication of the UAE presidency. We welcome the initial pledges that were made to the fund to support particularly vulnerable countries to address the consequences of climate change. However, we must recognize that much more financing must be mobilized to ensure this fund can be effective and consistent with its mandate. AOSIS urges countries to continue the critical work towards operationalizing this fund, including helping to expedite the critical work of the fund's board this year. Excellencies and colleagues, before we reach the stage where we experience loss and damage from the impacts of climate change, advancing the scale and impact of adaptation efforts in small islands remain a critical and urgent priority. The groundbreaking UAE framework for global climate resilience agreed in Dubai establishes the groundwork for meeting the Paris Agreement's global goal in adaptation, scaling up adaptation action and the flow of adaptation finance by setting ambitious and achievable high-level targets that will enable countries to transform towards a clean and a resilient future. To meet these targets, we must fulfill and go beyond the pledge to double adaptation finance by 2019 levels, from 2019 levels by 2025. This represents the floor of what should be provided for adaptation finance. We urge developed countries to make good on this promise and go beyond it in line with the needs of those particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And this leads me to the broader topic of climate finance and allows me to shift my focus towards COP29 and beyond. 2024 provides the international community the opportunity to determine one of the most consequential catalysts for achieving Paris Agreement goals, the setting of the new collective quantified goal on climate finance. As SIDS, we continue to highlight that climate finance is distinct and therefore additional to current and future development finance. Climate change has been recognized as a compounded challenge to the world on top of all the existing baseline development issues. It is therefore logical that climate change is added to requisite development and humanitarian finance. Double counting and repurposing of such finance is not only intellectually dishonest, but is simply unjust. In closing, I would once again like to thank our hosts for their hospitality and our COP28 presidency team and the incoming COP29 team for their continued hard work. Excellencies and colleagues, please be assured that on behalf of AOSIS, I will be actively engaging with all of you, not only to unpack the outcomes of COP28 and better understand what it will take to meet the commitments we made, but also to help us on a path to ensuring that these outcomes are implemented. The survival of our people on small island developing states depend on it. I thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, the Umbrella Group, and they share their speaking time between 3 countries. So first the UK, then the US, and then Norway. The UK?
Begin by thanking the UAE for the remarkable success of COP28 and Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber in particular and his team. The UAE consensus successfully concluded the first global stocktake, established the loss and damage fund, and for the first time, explicitly committed the world to transition away from fossil fuels. These were enormous achievements. We must build on the UAE consensus this year and critically agree the new finance goal and set the direction of travel for finance for the next decade and indeed beyond. We will work closely to support Azerbaijan, and it's fantastic to see you here, Sir, Minister Babayev, as it takes forward its work to COP29. We welcome the formation of the Troika and fully support the Troika's mission 1.5. We all know that this year will be critical in the development of NDCs in line with that historic UAE consensus. And the strength of those NDCs will determine whether we keep temperature rise below 1.5 degrees, as Professor Ski set out earlier. Strong leadership from the COP presidencies to encourage the highest ambition will be essential if we are to arrive in Belém with the goal still in reach. This is a collective effort. It's a collective effort, but we know that it is the major emitters, the G20, who will largely determine whether this is possible. No large emitter should hide from its responsibility. We've set 1.5 degrees as the goal. Now we must stay laser focused on the most important elements in delivering it and not be waylaid. The UK is committed to working with all, inside and outside the UNFCCC, to ensure that finance is scaled up to enable this. We appreciate the efforts of the Troika and encourage you to focus on delivering the UAE consensus. We strongly believe that it must be delivered, not reinterpreted, fulfilled, not renegotiated. We must stick to the mandate from the Paris Agreement and the UAE consensus and rely on the legitimacy that that brings. We need your support in ensuring that ambition and finance are mutually reinforcing and promote a race to the top. I fear some elements in the letter from the Troika move away from this. We've agreed on our guidance on NDCs, now we must produce them. It truly is our last chance for 1.5 degrees, and we would encourage the Troika to keep its focus on that ambition. Thank you.
And the US?
Thank you to Denmark for what is always a constructive and useful meeting. Congratulations to the UAE for the UAE consensus and COP28. And we look forward to working with Azerbaijan and Brazil, as others have said. I want to concentrate my minute on the Troika. We continue to think that the idea of a Troika is a good one for promoting continuity and momentum. And we appreciate your collaborative efforts and your commitment to 1.5-degree aligned NDCs for yourselves. But I have to be honest that we were quite surprised with certain parts of the letter. We agree that we need to get working on NDCs, given the deadline, that many countries will need support to develop the NDCs and to implement them, and that we need to work this year across multiple fora, including through the MDBs, to unlock substantially more climate finance. But we don't agree with what the letter calls the, quote, reframing of ambition. And we don't think it's true to the Paris Agreement or to the UAE consensus, and it is certainly not, quote, party-driven. I'll give you 4 examples. First, we found it strange that the letter omits the key paragraph of the UAE consensus that relates to NDCs, that calls for them to be economy-wide, all GHG, in addition to 1.5 aligned. Second, the letter suggests that this year's focus on NDCs should be all about support, and maybe even that support is a precondition to NDCs. Third, it focuses on barriers to NDCs as opposed to opportunities, or at least both of them. And fourth, it defines a, quote, high ambition NDC for developed countries as one that includes finance for developing countries. We find this not only inconsistent with the Paris Agreement and extremely controversial negotiations that took place in 2015, but highly prejudicial to the negotiations that are ongoing this year on the new quantified goal. So we do think the approach needs to be substantially reworked before being pursued. Thank you.
Thank you. And Norway?
Excellencies, friends and colleagues, thank you first and foremost to Dan Jørgensen for inviting us here to these historic grounds. I also want to extend my sincere gratitude to the COP28 President Al Jaber and his team for the tremendous effort in bringing the world together on a clear pathway towards 1.5 in Dubai. We are also looking forward to working together with the COP29 incoming presidency and to deliver the highest possible outcome in Baku. Furthermore, from our part, with now the COP30 presidency joining in the presidency Troika, we believe that we have a strong foundation established, bringing us further and faster towards the goals in the Paris Agreement and also working together on finance going forward. In doing so, and in support also of the comments made by my good colleague from the UK, we fully trust that we collectively will deliver according to the mandates and in line with the rules and procedures clearly stated in the Paris Agreement. Finally, allow me just to say that our work on our NDC is well underway, and in parallel, we are also updating our annual climate status and plan and strengthening the implementation to follow up collective agreements from Dubai, including policies to transition away from fossil fuels. This is the time for action, and we need to do it in line with the rules and procedures that we already have stated. Thank you.
Thank you, and that concludes this first session, and I will now have to ask the press to leave the room. Thank you.